What if the story you've heard about Philistine begins in the middle, not the beginning? In this video, we uncover the unfiltered facts so you're equipped against misinformation and reminded that you owe it to your own humanity to know the truth. The truth matters to all of us. If it can be done to them, it can be done to you. We'll start from the very beginning in the late 1800s. It all started in Europe. For centuries, Jewish communities had been under siege, not just by laws, but by mobs. From the Rhineland massacres of 1096 to the burnings during the Black Death, entire communities were wiped out or forced into the walled ghettos. Every generation, the same nightmare. But by the late 1800s, something new was brewing. This wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about taking control. After fresh pogroms, many led by Cossacks, sometimes even backed by local authorities, Jewish intellectuals started asking a different question. If the world keeps turning against us, do we need our own place to stand? Enter Nathan Birnbaum. He was the first to coin the term Zionism. At first it was cultural, about language, pride, identity. But Theodor Herzl changed the game. He turned it from culture into a plan. In 1897, Herzl called the first Zionist Congress. This was no longer a debate, it was strategy. He argued Jewish suffering won't end with tolerance, it ends when we get land. And that land in question was Philistine. They came up with a 4-point mission statement. It was clear, direct, and tactical. Secure a Jewish national home in Philistine, move settlers, farmers, tradespeople, entire families to the land, rebuild Jewish national identity, and lobby governments worldwide until the plan had backing. In Herzl's book, Der Judenstaat, the Jewish State, he didn't speak of divine destiny. He spoke like a strategist. He considered Argentina cheap, fertile, and mostly empty. But Philistine was the prize. Why? History, symbolism, politics. He even offered the Ottomans a deal. Let Jews settle there, and in return, they would manage Ottoman finances and guard Christian holy sites as a civilized buffer for Europe. This wasn't a mystical homecoming, it was a calculated move. Philistine was the clear choice here, as its connection to Jewish history made it far easier to justify the idea of taking the land by force if needed. And yes, Herzl himself called it Philistine. Anyone claiming the name never existed, they should read Herzl's own words. Not everyone bought into Herzl's plan. Nathan Birnbaum, the very man who coined the word Zionism, walked away from it. To him, it was losing its soul. Without culture and faith at the core, he warned any Jewish state would just be a shell. But the course was already set. Land would be bought, deals would be struck, and settlements would rise. This wasn't just about surviving pogroms anymore. It was about planting a flag, creating a new reality on the ground, one that would rewrite the entire region's future. But what did that mean for the people already living there? Here's the problem with the vision discussed in the first Zionist Congress. It wasn't drawn on a blank map. Philistine wasn't empty. It was already a home. By 1878, nearly 500,000 people already lived there. 85% were Muslim, 9% were Christian, and just over 3% were Jewish, mostly families who had lived there for generations. This wasn't wilderness, it was a living, breathing society. Farmers, traders, clergy, people had history in this land. But momentum was building. Even though there was internal debate, Zionism was no longer just an idea. It had funding, strategy, and powerful backers. Baron Rothschild, Baron de Hirsch, their investments turned theory into action. Here's how it worked. Land was often bought from absentee Ottoman landlords, people who lived miles away, sometimes in Damascus, Beirut, or even Istanbul. And the farmers working that land? They weren't asked. They just got word one day, the land was sold, and they were done. Then came the first Aliyah, the first wave of Jewish immigration. A About 35,000 newcomers, mostly from the Russian Empire and Romania, arrived in just 2 decades. They founded agricultural colonies: Petah Tikva, Rishon LeZion, Zichron Yaakov, Yesod HaMa'ala, Rosh Pina, Ekron and Gedera, and Nes Yona. These weren't empty spaces. Much of this land already had Philistini farmers. When ownership changed, they were removed. This was a quiet, strategic reshaping of the map, one field, one village at a time. By the 1880s, pressure points were forming, land was changing hands, and so were the stories about who belonged. On March 29, 1886, Petah Tikva, a fight broke out over grazing rights. Arab peasants from Yahudiyah clashed with Jewish settlers. 5 wounded and 1 death. Rachel Halevi, an elderly Jewish woman. She had been sick already. The records are clear. Natural causes. But that's not how the story was told. Halevi was remembered but reimagined. She became the first mother of the homeland. Some even claimed she was pregnant, a symbol of unborn generations. It wasn't history anymore. It was myth-making. Then the focus shifted. Not to her, but to her son, Sender Haddad. He became the prototype of the new Jew, strong, armed, mounted on an Arab horse, living like a desert warrior. There's no evidence he ever did any of this, but the image stuck. This wasn't just memory, it was strategy. In order to motivate a colony of European Jews on foreign land, the story of Rachel Halevi needed to change. She was too passive, too old, too feminine. She was pushed out of the story. Only her name remained as the mother of Sender Haddad. This marks the first case of Zionist propaganda. The Petah Tikva clash became more than a local dispute. It became one of the first battles for memory. These moves didn't go unnoticed. Sultan Abdulhamid II, ruler of the Ottoman Empire from 1876 to 1909, saw exactly where this was heading. Herzl came to him with an offer. Let us settle in Palestine, we'll pay off your debts, and we'll polish your empire's image in Europe. But Abdulhamid refused. He knew this wasn't just about selling land, it was about sovereignty. And once you give away sovereignty, you rarely get it back. Here's something most people forget. At the time, the Ottoman Empire had the largest Jewish population in the world. Thessaloniki wasn't just a city, it was the only Jewish majority city on earth. The Sultan wasn't just protecting Palestine, he was protecting the safety of the Jewish communities already living peacefully inside it. Think about it. If someone knocked on your door saying they wanted to reorganize your home for the greater good, would you trust them? When the Sultan said no, Zionist leaders didn't stop. They just changed tactics. They turned to absentee landlords in Beirut and Damascus, bought huge parcels of land, often without ever seeing them, and when the ink dried, it wasn't the landlords who felt the impact. It was the tenant farmers. No warning, no negotiation, no compensation. Generations of farmers were displaced overnight. Imagine renting a home for decades, raising your kids there, and one morning you're told it's been sold to someone you've never met. No appeal, no rights, just gone. And there was another trick, legal loopholes. Many settlers arrived under European passports. Thanks to capitulation laws, they were outside Ottoman legal reach. Local authorities couldn't touch them, even when there were disputes. This allowed Zionist organizations to quietly expand land purchases beyond the Sultan's control. To summarize, buy land, then flood land with illegal European Jewish immigrants via loopholes. By the 1890s, this wasn't just about survival anymore. Between 1890 and 1896, the Jewish Colonization Association built 9 new settlements across Palestine. These weren't just small farms. They had roads, schools, administrative hubs. They were meant to last, not just homes, footholds. By 1904, 6 more colonies took root in the north: Masha, a Philistini village, was erased and renamed Kfar Tavor, a new identity stamped over an old one. Then came the second Aliyah, between 1904 to 1914, around 40,000 new immigrants, many from the Russian Empire. These weren't just refugees. They were ideological Zionists. They arrived with a mission, with slogans like conquest of land and conquest of labor. This wasn't a handshake and a shared meal with your new neighbor. This was being told your house, your field, your entire livelihood was now part of someone else's project. Settlement accelerated, 5 new colonies in the north, and in 1909, the first all-Jewish city in modern history, Tel Aviv. Tension had been building for years now, and in 1908 it finally blew. What started as a labor dispute between new Jewish immigrants, many from Russia, and Philistini Arabs, turned into the first major riot of the era. For the first time, blood had been spilled. The Ottoman authorities moved quickly, but not in the way locals expected. Under pressure from Zionist leaders and European diplomats, Yafa's governor was dismissed. To Philistinis, this felt less like justice, more like being told the referee had been replaced mid-match by someone on the other team. This moment lit a fire. Philistini voices began to rise. Najib Nasser's El Carmel newspaper became the warning bell. Page after page, it told readers, this isn't just sanctuary, it's expansion, and it's accelerating. By the end of the first decade of the 20th century, the question of Philistine was no longer abstract. The transformation was real. Going back to Theodor Herzl's book, Der Judenstaat, his vision was more than a plan for safety. It was a manifesto for colonization. He called the future Jewish state a bastion of civilization, a European stronghold in the east, positioned against what he called the region's barbarism. This framing drew a different kind of participant: Russian Jews with military training, political radicals, and survivors of persecution. Letters between key players of the Zionist movement show something sinister. They came not just to escape, they came to invade, not just to farm, but to build a state, defend it, and conquer. In 1907, Zionism armed itself. Bar Giora, the first paramilitary group of the Zionist movement. It was secretive, selective, and deadly serious. Its mission was clear: secure land, defend settlements, and remove anything seen as an obstacle. And by obstacle, I mean the indigenous population of Philistine. 2 years later, Bar Giora grew into something larger, Hashomer, meaning the watchman. Funded by the Jewish Colonization Association, private donors like Edmund de Rothschild, and later by Zionist institutions, Hashomer became a formal paramilitary body. They trained in secret, they stockpiled weapons. Their strategy was deterrence, but it often meant violence and intimidation. What began as a farmer holding a rifle was becoming the silhouette of a terrorist group, one that would wreak havoc in Philistine. In 1897, Herzl wrote in his diary that the Jewish Colonization Association was negotiating to purchase nearly 100 villages from a wealthy Greek family, the Sursoks. This wasn't random, it was systematic, a plan to buy, clear and resettle the land with illegal European Jewish immigrants, turning entire villages into blank spaces on the map. In 1910, the Sursok family sold 10,000 dunams near Al-Fulah to the Jewish National Fund. Philistini tenant farmers, who had worked that land for generations, fought back. They petitioned all the way to Istanbul. Shukri al-Asali, the governor of Nazareth, joined them. He launched a press campaign, raised the issue in the Ottoman parliament, and refused to hand over the title deeds, no matter the price being offered. To counter this, Hashomer was sent to occupy the land. Governor al-Asali sent forces to drive them out. This was not negotiation, it was confrontation, a contest over who the land truly belonged to. In the end, al-Asali lost the diplomatic battle in the Ottoman courts, the farmers were expelled, the village of Al-Fulah was renamed Merhaviyah. To many Philistinis, this was no longer settlement, it was erasure. It started to feel and look like an invasion. In response, Philistines began to organize, but they weren't operating from equal ground. They had no central leadership, no treasury, no foreign powers lobbying on their behalf. Resistance was hyperlocal, neighbors meeting in courtyards, pooling what they had to hire lawyers. Najib Nassar became their loudest voice, warning that Zionist settlement was not just charity or refuge, but a project of takeover. Okay, now that we know about the internal struggles within Palestine, what happens next adds to the chaos. It's 1914, Europe is tearing itself apart, and the Ottoman Empire has to pick a side. They pick the Central Powers, and suddenly the Middle East is part of a war that stretches from the trenches of France to the deserts of Arabia. This wasn't just about armies, it was about railways, water supplies, shipping routes, and who controls them. With this in mind, the British pull out a different weapon: diplomacy. In 1915, Henry McMahon, Britain's High Commissioner in Egypt, starts writing to Sharif Hussein of Mecca, the man seen as the spiritual leader of the Arab world. His message: if you rise up against the Ottomans, we'll back you and give you your independence. But here's the catch: the letters are intentionally vague. They never actually spell out where this promised Arab state will begin or end. And Palestine? It's left complicated. Not quite promised, not quite excluded, a deliberate grey area. While Arab fighters were risking everything in the desert, fighting the Ottoman Empire, Britain and France were in the back room doing something very different. In 1916, they signed the Sykes-Picot Agreement. It quietly divided the Ottoman Arab provinces into spheres of influence. In other words, while promising independence to Sharif Hussein, Britain was carving up the map with France behind closed doors. And yet, the Arabs kept fighting. In June 1916, Sharif Hussein declared Arab independence. His sons, Faisal, Abdullah, and Ali, led the revolt with British weapons, British gold, and British promises still echoing in their ears. Enter Lawrence, the man history would call Lawrence of Arabia. He wasn't just an advisor, he was a spy, a strategist, and a storyteller, the bridge between British strategy and Arab hope. The revolt worked. One stronghold after another, Ottoman control crumbled. For a brief moment, the dream of an independent Arab kingdom, stretching from Aden to Aleppo, seemed real. But while that dream was building on the battlefield, Britain's other plans for Palestine were still in motion, and they were about to change everything. Now, here's where things get tricky. On one front, Arab fighters were bleeding for a promise of freedom. On another, Britain was deepening their ties with the Zionist movement, courting their support for the same war. Two promises, one land. You can feel where this is headed, can't you? Britain had just promised both sides a future they couldn't possibly share. And when the war was over, even Britain's own agents knew what had happened. Lawrence, the man who had fought alongside the Arabs, refused a knighthood. He walked out in silence. That silence was louder than any speech. Even Britain's hero saw it. The deal was broken. To see how we got here, let's rewind. We'll walk the full timeline, putting the pieces together, linking events, so we can fully understand and grasp the situation. Between 1882 and 1914, two major waves of Aliyah brought tens of thousands of European Jews to Palestine. Yes, much of the land was purchased illegally, often from absentee landlords in Beirut or Istanbul, but for the tenant farmers already working that soil, the deal meant eviction. And the now vacant land was flooded with illegal European Jewish immigrants using loopholes within the Ottoman system. By the early 1900s, the colonization effort had teeth. Giora, Hashomer, these weren't just volunteer watchmen. They were organized, disciplined, and armed. Their mission was to clear, hold the land at any cost. This wasn't farming with rifles. It was the beginning of a doctrine, control through deterrence, and when necessary, through force. Then came the Great War. Britain dangled independence before the Arabs in the McMahon-Hussein correspondence, just as it secretly carved up the region with France in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Arab fighters thought they were liberating their future. In reality, they were helping redraw a map already promised to someone else. By 1916, three forces were locked onto the same land. Zionists saw a national home, Arabs saw self-determination, Britain saw a cornerstone of empire. The fall of the Ottomans didn't resolve the question, it lit the fuse. These early decades turned hope into friction, and British diplomacy fractured the region. Each step triggered the next. Settlements led to protest, protest led to repression, repression led to mistrust. By the eve of 1917, Palestine was a battleground of visions. These aren't just old stories, they're the roots of everything that followed, the reason today's headlines still sound like echoes of the past. If you want to understand the century that came after, the mandate, the wars, the peace talks, the uprising, we have to start here, because this is where the collision began. You can't hope to understand the occupation of Palestine, the apartheid state of Israel, just by looking at the symptoms. You need to investigate and diagnose the root cause of the symptoms. And this is what this video aims to deliver on. Thank you for taking this journey through the contested history of Palestine. In the next chapter, we explore the turning point, the Balfour Declaration, British Mandate Rule, and the path to the Nakba.